Hey, this is William Tidcup and Ryan Leary. You're listening and watching the You Should Know podcast. We've got Melanie on today. And Melanie, we're going to be talking about AI and then how AI can help you find hidden talent.
Sure,
So before we jump into that juicy topic, would you do us a favor and introduce yourself?
absolutely. Melanie Lougee, I've been working in HR and HR technology for 25 years, mostly in product management, but I've also been a customer running global HR systems for Logitech at one
Oh,
point.
wow.
Um,
Mm.
and then I was also a research vice president at Gartner for about 4 years, running the HCM Suites Magic Quadrant and some other stuff like that. I left Gartner to come to ServiceNow to try to build something new and different and fix some mistakes of the past. And right now I'm heading a future HR product from a
Oh,
group
cool.
within ServiceNow called NowX. So we are the incubators that work on the future stuff before it becomes generally available. So
So let
it's
me
a
see
pretty
if I,
cool
I
job.
get this straight. Practitioner, so you've
Hmm.
actually worked the desk,
Hmm.
then an analyst, so you
Hmm.
helped practitioners
Hmm.
avoid some of the pitfalls and things like that.
Hmm.
You're now working with one of the best vendors in the space, and now within that, you're working on future products, things that we won't see. It's like the DARPA of products. So you're looking at flying cars and stuff like that for
Hmm.
ServiceNow, building out those technologies. Two questions about the incubator before we get into the topic. Do you, do you incubate other people, like other startups,
No.
and do that? It's all internal.
No, we do partner quite a bit, some with partners who are building apps, on
Right,
our store. So we will
right.
definitely collaborate where we see partners, innovating in certain areas.
Right.
But mostly we get ideas from our customers or from product or from sales or just market trends. And we spin up a small group and we build the proof of concept and
Yeah.
scale, see how it's going to do and move things ahead very quickly.
In the defense contracting world, they call it skunk works.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that's the term is somebody has an idea and they throw four or five engineers at it,
Get
and
it done.
and it,
Yeah.
and yeah, it either comes out as something or it dies on the vine and no big deal.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fun group. It's actually led by a guy named Eric Schroeder, who is employee number 18 at ServiceNow. So the team
Wow.
is
Wow.
definitely kind of maintained its startup culture, if you will,
Yep.
and it's definitely a cool team to be a part
Yeah.
of.
How many employees does ServiceNow have?
Keep me honest. I think we're at about 24,000, something
Yeah.
Wow.
like that.
And employee
Last time I
number
checked,
18. Yeah, he's
that's impressive.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well,
Yeah.
there was a connection at one point between success factors and ServiceNow, if I remember some of it, I might not remember it correctly, but there were people that kind of came over, some executives early on that had some type of track record at Success Factors, and I don't know if that's still the case or if I have that wrong, by the
Well, the
way.
only person that I can think of is Bill McDermott, our CEO, right? So he was a past president at
Right,
Success
right.
Factors. And he
Oh,
also used to be a president at Gartner, too. So, he's been some interesting places.
wow.
Hmm.
Uh, Gardner does great work in their HR conference. I've heard, I haven't been to it yet, or HR Reimagined, I think is what it's called. I've heard so many good things about what they're doing. Like crazy, crazy good stuff. So, great, great, absolute great background. Let's jump into the topic. AI and hidden talent. What are you seeing right now in the marketplace?
Sure. So we're seeing a lot of different market drivers kind of converging right now. So, some of the things that we're seeing is just a skills shortage that is keeping on growing. And that's being driven by a few things. It's being driven by new technologies that need to be adopted. It's driven by geopolitical shifts from, where things are being built, where things are being used. It's being driven by an aging workforce, if you will, where a greater percentage of the workforce over 55 is growing. So
Right.
there's a massive skills shortage that we're already starting to feel the impact of today. And we're going to feel more of those impacts in the future as some of these trends start developing over time. And we're also at the same time seeing this evolution of technology, and not just generative AI. We can talk about
Right.
generative AI too, and I'm sure we will, but it started long before Gen AI. It started with machine learning. It started with intelligent search. It started with a lot of other aspects of skills intelligence. So,
Right.
the problem has been there around that for a long time where, a company needs skills, an organization needs skills, they're changing product lines, they're evolving. And it's been very difficult to get the right people in the right positions at the right time. And there's been a lot of attempts to do this in the past, but I think we're finally at a point where the technology is now there to be able to do those kinds of things effectively because it doesn't
Right.
all need to be manual anymore.
No, I just did a demo before or my vanity moment. I did a demo
Is this for all your
of
headshots?
yeah, yeah. Headshot collection. That's what I'll give my sons when I die. Anyhow, and the guy that was doing the demo, he pulls up and it's hourly worker, so it's a little bit
Mm-hmm.
different. Person applied. They did a language test. They did another kind of a behavioral assessment. And the offer was made. Offers was accepted, and start date was enabled. All in one shot,
Mm-hmm.
and all within 51 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
In 51 minutes, and it's an hourly worker, so it's a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
And so within 51 minutes, candidate went through that process. A virtual recruiter
Mm-hmm.
then did what they needed to do all the way to offer letter and schedule.
Yep.
Like, I mean, I worked in retail 100 years ago. I can't even imagine that world. Like, so foreign to what I know. So, like, what do you like? I'm sure you're seeing that, but do you see anything different with salaried talent or corporate talent and hourly or high volume?
Yeah, there's a huge difference between those two different groups. So, what
Right,
you're talking about with the example that you gave about the
right,
hourly worker, first of all, that's a really impressive example.
Yeah.
And to me, like that has nothing to do with AI at that point. I mean, it can. I'm sure it was applied at some point, but
100%.
that's just exceptional. That's just exceptional process mapping and
Right, right,
exceptional workflow. And like somebody really did a great job of tightening up what this process needs to be and
right.
automating it, right? Maybe there's some
Yeah,
intelligence in that automation, but definitely being able to default move things along, conditionally approve things behind the
right,
scenes,
right.
figure out what the risk is that you might get something you don't want.
You're using
Hmm.
it's like you're in on the demo.
Yeah.
You're using words that they were using.
Yeah,
That's what's
exactly.
funny about it. As you're talking about it, I'm like, damn, she's using the exact same the same words.
Yeah. Well,
Augmentation versus automation and all that other
mhm.
stuff. Like, we don't have humans involved. Why
Yeah.
are humans involved in this transaction?
Yeah, exactly. And you can do that
Silly.
with high volume, right? Because they tend to be high turnover. You need to do maybe volume over the qualitative
Right.
assessment at an individual level. So it's kind of like speed over perfection. Whereas
Right.
when you're doing hiring for more of a salaried kind of a role, it's more perfection and hopefully as much speed as you can get. But the
Right.
balance of, the risk
Yeah.
of getting a poor hire or a poor fit is much higher when you're talking about a salaried employee that you're going to be investing a lot more time and resources. You're going to want to vet this person. You're still going to want to have an efficient process, as efficient as possible, and you're going to want to start things as early as you can in the process and tighten it up wherever you can. But it still needs to be a much more thorough process. People need to be involved. You need to have conversations. You need to do more checking more carefully. So there's definitely added diligence, both
Right.
up front and on the back end with that. And that's an area where intelligence can help a lot. You still need to have a really good underlying process and workflows and connectivity and all of those kinds of things before you can then effectively add AI on top of it. But
Right.
yes, yeah.
Right. So, Melanie, I've got a question for you. Where's the disconnect between corporate or the process in recruiting
Yeah.
Hmm.
and hiring or finding that specific talent that they're looking for? Is there, and I guess my mind goes to the human, the recruiter, still
Hmm.
wants to be part of that. The company's reluctant to use the technology. Where are we at today? And, I guess we can do a spoiler alert. Where do we end up? We'll say by the end of this year, where do we end up with the work that you're looking at and the things that you're doing?
Sure. So a lot of it kind of depends on the corporate culture, if you will. So,
Right.
some corporate cultures, particularly in certain, we'll call it more traditional industries, they really want the recruiters to control the process, right?
Hmm.
Other organizations that tend to move a little bit faster, they want a hiring manager to be much more involved
Hmm.
in that process and maybe do some of the vetting, themselves in there. So there's definitely different schools of thought in how to effectively recruit for different kinds of roles. And I think I kind of lost the thread of where the rest of your question was going. Can you remind me?
Yeah, yeah. Where are we going to end up?
Oh,
So, I mean, we know we kind of we feel like we know
mhm,
personally, like we know where it's going to go, but
yeah.
where do we really end up? I mean, are we really just going to rely on technology to be, William, in your example, a
Mhm.
virtual recruiter? Are we really going to get there and eliminate this role and move our current recruiter into just a relationship manager? Where do you see us going?
Hmm.
I think it will move in that direction. But I do think that there will always need to be humans in the middle of this process.
Agreed.
There's a lot of things that can be automated. There's a lot of things that can be, generated by AI. There's a lot of, automation that can happen. But at the end of the day, I don't think you can have a process where you are wanting to attract in a human, that has opinions and
Right.
ideals
Hmm.
and
Right.
Right.
their own life situation, and expect to hire them without creating a human connection, right?
Right.
um
Right. And because I'm sorry, Melanie,
no, go ahead.
because I'm a visual person,
Hmm.
um, I use it as a slide scale
Hmm.
where do you want your humanity?
Yeah, that's
So
a good way to put
where
it.
we
Right.
came from, your Connexa days and IBM days, the humanity was pushed way up front.
Hmm.
Right.
I
This
think the
is it's going to
humanity,
slide back.
Yeah.
I think again, I don't think you're going to get humanity out of recruiting. In fact, I think to do so is not a good idea. I
Hmm.
think it's sliding that humanity to where it's appropriate for that particular company or maybe that job.
Yeah.
And so, Melanie, I,
It's also
the,
about, oh, go
yeah,
ahead,
go ahead.
sorry, I interrupted.
No, you're good.
Okay. I
Go.
was also going to say, where it makes the most sense to apply the automation is on the pieces that aren't necessarily touching the employee, unless
Right,
they're touching the employee or the candidate or the applicant or,
Right.
whoever it might be. Um, you know, that is, it's helping them and is providing value to them, right? So if we think about, augmenting a human connection with, I'm just trying to get through this application workflow, give me an intelligent way to do this where I'm not stuck, right? Help me through this. That might be something that could help with a, with a process, right? But it's not going to replace a conversation when I then need to get through the qualitative part of this experience. But the
right,
administrative part, I think, is very ripe for improvement. And being able to automate a lot of the things that are happening behind the scenes, or being able to automate a lot of the things at the front end of the process before that person arrives, right? So
right.
being able to use
Pre-boarding,
intelligence.
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, yes, or just trying to find, like, maybe I can use all of the employee data that we have already and mine that and figure out where are going to be the best target locations or universities or whatever that I might want to go looking for somebody, or how can I create a really good interview panel, for example.
Yeah.
That maybe I'm not burning out the same five people, and maybe those five people aren't very diverse to begin with, and maybe they're not, like, they're not all
Mm.
interviewing for different things. So,
That's
how,
interesting. Yeah, I like that.
yeah, exactly. So how can I use technology to make that experience better? for that person, so that when people get in the room and have that conversation, they're asking intelligent questions. They're not all asking the same questions. They don't all look the same. So how can I use
Hmm.
technology to be able to deliver the best in humanity? I think would be a really good way to approach it.
Yeah, Wim, I think we get stuck in the recruiting portion of this,
Mm-hmm.
version
Mm-hmm.
of AI sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not so much, but I think recently that's where my mind's been is how do
Mm-hmm.
we make the recruiters' lives better? But I really, Melanie, what you said about the interview panels,
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really put much thought into that, and I really do like that because
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to have an interview, well, your list of interviewers, right, your panel of interviewers, there does need to be a good
Mm-hmm.
makeup, right? There needs to be a good mix. They need to be intelligent, they need to be prepared, they need to be ready to
Diverse.
go, diverse, the whole thing. Yeah, and if I'm picking the interview because I like these four managers and they're
Mm-hmm.
interviewing 30 times a month,
Mm-hmm.
Garbage in,
I'm not
garbage out.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, so I really like looking at it that way as opposed to just how do we automate, for example, the recruiting process.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We often forget about that part of the process, which
Well,
really
well,
makes the determination.
we,
Right.
Melanie, you're probably getting the same stuff. We get hit with low value tasks versus high value tasks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's automate or as
Mm-hmm.
much of the low value, like scheduling and stuff
Yeah.
like that. Let's get all that stuff
Yeah.
out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
Question, because being a practitioner
Mm-hmm.
and you understand the importance of process, you've said process 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
Does, do you think AI has a responsibility in making our process more efficient? If not now, in the future, do you see AI actually saying, because like in the example that we were talking about, you're like, someone has streamlined this
Mm-hmm.
and gotten all the waste
Yep.
out.
Mm-hmm.
We've all dealt with convoluted stuff.
Yeah.
Like it's just stripped all that stuff
Yeah.
out. Now that was manual
Mm-hmm.
because they told me how they did it. But do you see AI helping in that and identifying the
Yeah.
blocks or the bottlenecks or the weak points and inefficiencies and
Yeah.
things like that?
Absolutely. ServiceNow, actually has process mining capabilities, right?
Oh,
So
cool.
we can actually take an end-to-end workflow, run it through process mining, and it will tell you where everything is getting stuck.
Oh,
So it can
that's
actually
cool.
visually map that out. So,
Yeah.
so the technologies are out there. It's a matter of being able to take those technologies and bring them to bear in an area like recruiting or
Right,
internal mobility,
Hmm.
for example, that haven't benefited yet from some of the most advanced technologies, that are out there at this point. And, I think the technology is really there to be able to advance a lot of things now. Like there's that process transparency as well, also just knowing where something is sitting, just
right.
having a workflow that you can see, right? So like I know
Hmm.
that William
Yeah.
still hasn't approved this thing. I can see it on my screen, right? And
It's
like
not Janet's onboarding process.
exactly.
Yeah, right,
So and being able to maybe intelligently skip some of those processes, those
right,
steps, because this is within a certain range, and why do I need to spend
Right.
my time on this, right? So there's definitely stuff that can be done, there as well. Yeah, and I also think that another area where we've come a long way is, we've been talking about skills intelligence forever, but it's
Yeah.
in the past it's been something that you set it up and it's immediately stale because it's manually
right,
maintained. But now
right,
that skills can be delivered on an AI platform, and it can infer skills from a resume, it can
right.
infer skills from an assignment that somebody has been on internally, it
Hmm.
can make recommendations and say, hey, maybe you didn't think about this job before, but you actually wouldn't be such a bad fit. But I know that there's kind of a lot of talk about that's happening right now, but I think that the promise is actually beyond where it's being talked about right now. I think the real promise of being able to do something like that, especially in the area of like internal mobility, is if we can get skills into like a corporate level,
Right.
into the UX level, into a platform level, the real promise of those kinds of things is being able to have skills, in customer service, being able
Yeah.
to have those
Right.
skills integrated with scheduling, being able to integrate those skills with supply chain, so that you can actually say not just, hey, Ryan, here's some jobs you might want to think about, or Ryan thinking like, what do I want to be when I grow up, and how do I get there? But also being able to look at operations and say, hey, we're going to have a shortage in people who know how to work on
Right.
electric cars instead of on gas powered cars. We need to start developing these skills and be able to identify people early. So I think
Right.
that where that's really going is beyond the walls of HR. I think it
Yeah.
needs to go
Should.
broader.
Well, and
Should.
even the example Melanie just gave, which I really like, is where we need to identify these skills we're going to need in the future, but
Hmm.
also here are the subset of people in
Hmm.
the company that potentially would be good
Yeah.
Yes.
to move forward in this.
Hmm.
Tangential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So question to, I guess, everybody here: have you ever thought about it? I think about this more recently than not, and it's somewhat depressing. If you think back in your career, just 5 years ago,
Okay.
Hmm.
all the things that you were doing that you thought were genius, that now is done literally with a click of a button. And I'm thinking of what you just said around skills. You do a whole skills
Hmm.
taxonomy, and then it's stale because it's
Hmm.
manually. There's so many things that
It's
I've
it's
done.
actually it's actually worse than that. So skills, the fever, most of hype cycle that you go through right now with skills, and then we're going through with skills, is the same hype cycle that we went through with competency models
Yep.
15
Right.
years ago. And the right and wrong part of competency models is if
Hmm.
you apply it to all everything you do, and we'll just stay in HR, but it's actually broader than HR, just like skills.
Hmm.
If you do it in hiring, and you do it in internal mobility and promotions, and you do it in firing,
Hmm.
and you apply competencies across the entire journey of candidate, employee, alumnus, etc., then competency models can work. They
Hmm.
have the ability to work. Where people, and I believe where people are going to make the exact same mistake with skills, is they're only going to apply them in selective spaces.
Yep.
And it's going to be, and Melanie, not to your brilliant point of being outside of HR and touching
Hmm.
other facets of the business,
Hmm.
we're not even getting the HR part right or the recruiting part right.
Hmm.
So it's a lot of talk. And when we go to HR Tech in a couple months, there'll be everybody will be talking about skills.
Hmm.
And me being jaded, um, I think a lot of it is just talk because companies are going to be selective
Hmm.
in where they apply skills taxonomy. So not only are they stale,
Hmm.
check, it's worse than that, from my opinion. Now,
Hmm.
Melanie, as an analyst, you could easily crush that, but we went through the same hype cycle, in my opinion, with
Yeah.
competency models.
Yeah,
That's where
I absolutely agree. I think goals is kind of right there too. Like,
yeah, good point.
one of those things
Mhm.
where people don't really know like what is a goal versus what is a KPI versus what is
Yeah.
this, right?
Yeah,
And
bokeh
Your
eye.
SMART goals, get them
exactly.
out.
And
Yeah.
I mean, and meanwhile, like unless they're actually usable and deliver value to the
Yep.
employee or deliver value to the manager in their day to day, like at that point, it's just kind of a pardon me for saying this, but it's HR rolling out stuff that thinks is cool.
Right.
But unless it's delivering value, to the business, unless it's delivering value to me, then it becomes something that I have to do once a quarter, and you never get the adoption. So I think there are ways that with skills or with internal mobility, I think that it can be done better, right? So kind of getting to your point about are these things all the same, or is there something different about this? I think there can be,
Right.
because I think one, the technology is there. But I think one of the things that could make or break one of these implementations is maybe an intentional starting slow, right? Because
Mhm.
it can be really daunting for a company to think I've got to do all this business process reengineering before I can even adopt this. But if you can start it with, we have, this group of people, or we need to hire for this kind of a job, and take sort of these discrete use cases, get some proof points, show that it's got some value, and then think about expanding on it. So I think some companies are daunted because
Yeah.
they've been through competencies and they've been through goals, and maybe a gradual approach might work better.
How do you eat an elephant?
Right.
one bite at a time.
Exactly.
So I think you're absolutely right.
Hmm.
Is the daunting part of an implementation and being overwhelmed with not having the capabilities to then be able to handle it, but
Hmm.
also worried about, and rightfully so, worried about the adoption and how we're going to train people and get people to actually use the technology. Okay, so at one point we're going to have to talk about your topic, because if we don't, we're going to have a whole host of people that are going to be mad at us.
Yes.
So,
We
so you
we can
did.
throw some edits in and move this to the
Ah,
front. We
yeah.
mash it around. It's all
So,
good.
And
so,
I'm gonna take a sip of water now.
Yeah.
so, hidden talent in AI. There's a
Mhm.
relationship, and that's one of the things that was really attractive to us about the topic with you. Where are you seeing that applied? Like,
So
what's
we're
top of
seeing
mind
that
for you?
apply in, all kinds of different industries, particularly industries that are moving really fast right now, right? So technology is always moving really fast, and,
Right.
there's going to be a huge shortage, of workers in tech. Like we just did a bunch of research, recently, and, like even ourselves, like even ServiceNow, like we're working to skill, hundreds of thousands of people, just to meet our own demands, right?
Right.
And we're looking at doing that in short order. So some of it is just, the demands change, the skills change really quickly. If we look at some of the other areas where skills are changing really quickly, think about manufacturing. It's just not done the way that it was, 20 years ago at all. The factories are different, the technologies are different, the geolocations of where manufacturing is happening
Right.
is being different. And that means you've got to build buildings, and you need new technologies as you build those buildings, and all of those. So there's major shifts happening across a lot of different industries. So how do you figure out who the best people are to be able to move into these new roles, or to be able to position to grow, because it is so much more effective if you can take somebody that's already at your company and move them along. And most employees would rather find an internal job, doing internal mobility and being able to grow with their company, than have to start over again with another company. So, I think it was Gartner that said, that, they think that 30% of companies will have adopted, some sort of an internal marketplace, within the next, I think it was 10 years, something along those lines. And I think that that's true. I think we're definitely seeing a big push to, make the most out of the talent, that organizations already have. And, what we mean by hidden, right, is that, sometimes it's not always the usual suspects that might be good for those roles. So how do you find
Right.
them, right? How do you, realize that, the person that is the unsung hero, or the person that's in marketing, might actually be really good, at some sort of a product role? Like, how do you figure those things out unless you can start looking at the individual people differently? So I think that there's a lot of promise in being able to say, William, we understand that you are this industry, guru, and you're well respected, and you lead a great podcast and whatever else. But dang, look at that artwork behind you. Like, also, by the
You're
way,
you're clearly bipolar.
right, like he's also a great artist. Maybe he would be great at marketing
Yeah.
creativity, or, something like that. But you can't know those things unless you, can sort of understand what your whole skill set is, and then be able to, intelligently say, well, it might be called 12 different things too. Like,
Right.
somebody that's a marketing assistant could be doing 5 different jobs. So how do I kind of know the difference between that? And then how can I make some intelligent suggestions, or even beyond, right? Like, how can I look out there at the publicly available information and see what kinds of things are my competitors hiring for, right? Like,
Right.
what are some of the new skills that are showing up on LinkedIn? Like what is out there that I should be thinking about, that I might be wanting to add into my internal searches or my external searches. So being able to, again, sort of extend beyond the immediate and look at, how can I start creating more of a funnel, like more of a line of sight into, you know, what are my competitors looking at? What should I be looking at? Am I missing something here?
Ryan, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious. So this is all very fascinating to me. Melanie. This is
Mhm.
like the world I grew up in, and the and I've seen it done mostly because I was out before all of this. It was
Mhm.
all manual, right?
Mhm.
Right.
So all of it, and I'm thinking IBM days, we had blue pages where we threw our goals into, where we threw our skill, what we thought we were good at, right? And then the manager never looked at it other
Right.
than
Mhm.
review time, right?
Mhm.
Meanwhile, the employee never looked at it
Mhm.
ever, right? So, so we were never able to make that work,
Yeah.
right? Never ever to make that work. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Where do you kind of fall on a
Mhm.
company that's leveraging technology to not just identify the individual, but actually
Mhm.
guide
Mhm.
the employee and
Yeah.
say, okay, we know you want to go here,
Mhm.
but we're going to put you here because
Mhm.
we want you to be over here. And for those that are listening, I'm actually drawing in the air.
Mhm.
Um, so I want to be, for example, I want to go to an operations manager
Mhm.
into that role.
Mhm.
But I would make a better ops manager if I did these three things
Yeah.
first based on
Absolutely.
my skill. How
Yeah.
how do we get to that? Are there any use cases now? Are companies doing this? And if not, how do we get there?
Choose your
Sure.
own adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we actually call them growth plans. So we actually
Mhm.
have these in our talent development, capabilities.
Ah,
We have customers. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to announce who they
Uh,
are
no,
because I haven't been checked.
don't
cool.
tell
So
us.
we'll have to see.
Okay.
But what we built was built on the premise of exactly what you just talked about, right?
Okay.
Of that if somebody wants to get somewhere, there are many steps to go
Yeah.
there. And right now, especially because of proliferation of point solutions over the years, an organization could have
Hmm.
5 different learning systems. They've got a
Yeah.
goal system. They
Yeah.
might have some sort of
It
mentorship
was so
program.
frustrating. I
Yeah,
hated it. Yeah.
Well,
exactly. And so
it's
what
worse
we
than that because it was for folks. I'll just say women
Mhm.
and minorities. Just kind of keep it simple. It was hidden knowledge.
Mhm.
That path for
Mhm.
men was not hidden. It
Right.
was explained.
Mhm.
But for everyone else,
Yeah.
white men in particular, it
Mhm.
was not explained.
Right.
And so it was kind of voodoo-ish,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So like, how do I get from being a manager to a VP?
Mhm. Yeah.
There is, you have many paths to that place,
There's an intentional path, though.
Yeah.
but
Mhm.
men would know the paths
Mhm.
and then take the assignments and do whatever. And I think everyone else just had to kind of figure it out on their own. And I think
Mhm.
my opinion, the wonderful part about technology is it levels that. It
Yeah.
takes all that institutional knowledge
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
male network shit out
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
this, and then says, okay, here's the paths.
Yep.
Here
And
you go.
that's
Choose your own adventure.
Yep, and that's kind of one of the other benefits of, skills, right?
Yep.
If we can look at that instead of what somebody looks like or,
Right.
what they've done
Right.
before, then I think that there can be an equalization there as well. And I was mentioning kind of how we've addressed this is before as somebody's been bouncing around on that path, it's like maybe they take a couple of classes, but nobody really sees that they've taken those classes. Like maybe they
Right.
get a little bit of coaching at some point, but that's not really woven in. Maybe they've, done some sort of, internal assignments to try to, be able to develop something, but none of it's connected. So we kind of
Right.
came at it with an approach of, being able to say, I want to become that operations manager, and then being able to have a system that's intelligent enough to say, well, today you're here, and if you want to be there, here is the path that you would need to have to go there. And it can be worked on between an
Hmm.
employee and their manager, or an employee can do it on their own. And it will say, here's some courses, here's people in the company that are really good at doing this right now. Here's kind of where the demand is for this.
Right.
And it can actually create a plan across multiple underlying systems, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that it's not just kind of like hoping that somehow you just happen to get lucky in the right place. There's actually,
Yeah.
visibility and
It's
intentionality
like
Yeah.
behind
Google.
it.
It's like Google Map getting visual. It's like Google Maps and Google Maps giving you from point to point. There's 5 different ways, and
Hmm.
here's the hours or whatever
Yeah.
time it takes to get there.
Hmm.
That's none of that stuff was visual. None of that stuff was
Right.
things that were passed on,
Hmm.
and the technology, I think is now, we're just now at the place.
Yeah.
Like I remember working with people that were doing video in the early aughts, and
Hmm.
we didn't have enough bandwidth.
Right.
Now that's not a problem. We got bandwidth. And
Hmm.
so video, however you want to do it, is easy. So my last question is, in the 60s, General Dynamics, Lockheed, NASA, pretty much all the defense contractors,
Hmm.
they hired smart people. They basically went through whatever universities, and they would just, we don't care. Are you smart?
Hmm. Yeah.
They didn't have job descriptions. They didn't have roles. They just hired smart people and then threw them in a box and said, figure it out.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of aptitude, maybe
Hmm.
some attitude in there. And so what do I get your take on is like, okay, it's great to have the skills, but should we also be looking at um,
Yeah.
elasticity or how people deal with ambiguity? How they deal and can consume those things because they can have the skills, but if
Hmm.
the skills change and they're rigid and they're not elastic enough to then take on the new skills, who
Hmm.
cares if who, in my opinion, we've inventoried their skills,
Hmm.
we've given them a path,
Hmm.
but if they don't have the personality to then take that path,
Hmm.
we've wasted time, in my opinion.
Hmm.
We've wasted time, money, and energy hiring this person.
Hmm.
So is it just for you? Is it just a game, or is it a game of skills and collecting skills, both tangential and maybe even skills as it relates to they have the ability to develop the skill? Do
Hmm.
they have the aptitude, attitude, etc.?
Or the
Like I'm
interest.
trying, or the interest, great, passion, like
Hmm.
those, all that soft stuff, that's
Hmm.
assessment stuff. It seems like we probably should be leaning more on that
Hmm.
to find out more about the individual,
Hmm.
and then find the more like how are they going to deal with the
Hmm.
future?
Right.
Or is it going to crush them? And I
Hmm.
use the 60s just because they just hired smart people, and it was all white men. So we'll just say it as it is. But
Hmm.
they hired white men out of the Ivy League schools, and
Hmm.
they either went for the FBI or they went for defense contractors, one
Hmm.
way or another. And they just threw them. I remember talking to people that worked at GD at the time,
Hmm.
and they didn't have jobs.
Hmm.
Like they went in at 7,
Hmm.
they left at 6. That
Hmm.
was the job. And then
Hmm.
they would work on 3M was one of these companies too. They would just figure it out.
Hmm.
And I don't know if we're getting closer to that or far away from that, or if we're trying to figure out skills and like, do they have the ability to even comprehend the pathways that they have, the opportunities? If we can make it visual, great. We'll give them all the pathways. Choose your own
Hmm.
adventure. Do they have the gumption,
Yeah.
the interest to then choose your own adventure?
Well, I think, in some ways, this brings us back full circle to, you know, where is technology appropriate, and where is technology supporting humanity, right?
Right.
So you can identify opportunities, you can provide training, you can do all of these kinds of things, but it's going to take probably a different kind of manager in the future to be able
Ooh.
to nurture a team in a different way, right?
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So if I'm managing a team, and they've been brought in, and some of them are going to show that they like the elasticity, they want a new challenge, they're willing to adapt, and some aren't, how can I, as a human, either bring this person along, or make a difficult decision, or find a different kind of role for them, or something along those lines.
Right.
Because I do think that, as work gets automated kind of behind the scenes, and as frankly, as employees have much more access to being able to grow their own careers, right? Like, they can reskill,
Good
and they can
point.
decide they want to go do something else, and they can figure out their coursework using Gen AI, and they're aware of their opportunities, and how to get there in a way that they never have been before. Like, I better be a really good human manager if I want to be able to keep my team and be able to retain that talent, and grow them, right? So I think once again, it's like you've got the technology that can make a lot of things better and clearer and more transparent, but then you need that human side to evolve as well.
Amen. That's all we got.
Drops mic, walks off stage. We could have talked to you for like another 2 hours.
Yeah, this
So
is fun. I can't believe an hour went by already.